Okay, I've been recording and writing this script over and over again. I got caught in a boot loop of starting and resetting this project, and eventually, I had to just shelve it and try again later. Anywho, my name is Raine, and this is a follow-up to my previous video about Inscryption. Sorry for the delay. It goes without saying that Inscryption is a work of art. It's literally amazing. It is a masterpiece. If you like horror, mythology, deep stories with overlapping narratives that are not only intriguing but flawlessly put together, then obviously you've already played it because you're watching this video. I started playing Kaycee's mod officially after dropping my previous video a few months ago. I'll share more about my thoughts of Kaycee's mod towards the end, because I still have some stuff to go over first in general. This is meant to be a brief, less intensive follow-up video to my previous essay. I'm just going to be yapping about stuff I like about Inscryption and things that I think people aren't really discussing. Now, personally, I am probably one of the few people who falls really closely into the intersection of things that Inscryption draws from and magnifies into itself, which is to say, there are many things about Inscryption that speak to me on a deep and personal level. I figured I could talk about that stuff here and now, as opposed to in the essay, which is largely more formal, and had a point, which I will not be going over too much in this video, so be sure to watch it. This really is just things I like about Inscryption and stuff I noticed that I don't see talked about a lot. Okay, obviously, the Scrybes of Inscryption are extremely cool and fitting characters. They clearly represent folkloric ideas of our existence from a human standpoint. They carry with them eldritch knowledge of things that orbit just outside of human understanding, right at the very edges of what we understand. Zoomed further enough away, there is an undeniable gulf of information that we lack that they seem to carry. I like to justify the four scribes' existences on a quadrant system with two axes. The y-axis is life to death, with Leshy at the top and Grimoire at the bottom. Intersecting that at the x-axis is magic to science, with Magnificus at the one end and Poe at the other. Viewing the scribes this way also helps justify them as a pantheon, as four extremes who are dissimilar enough to warrant their own categories of card classification. Not only is their existence evident and self-justifying, it's extremely clever. It's important to note the very literal nature of the opposition on these axes. Leshy and Grimoire are opposed as life and death, but Leshy incorporates Grimoire's mechanics into his campaign because they suit each other, and despite being opposite ends of a spectrum, they're more alike than explicitly stated, being a part of each other in some aspects, while separate in most others. The same is true for Poe's pilfering of Magnificus's deck mechanics, as magic and science have always had a history of overlapping and being confused. The magic we don't understand today is simply the science of tomorrow. The magic we feared yesterday is simply the science we understand and utilize today. I don't want to give a bunch of specific facts and details because Inscryption intentionally keeps these things ambiguous, but I will say handedly, gem moxes are computer and or battery adjacent. They're literal batteries in some respects, as they are needed to power or play cards that require them. Energy is a different distillation of that same power moxes use, and it could be argued that the overlap between mox and energy is not a shallow one. So long as we can't measure the individual units that make things function, their distinction is actually more blurred than expressed. Also important to note is that Leshy and Poe subsume Grimoire and Magnificus's deck mechanics because the latter scribes have the least complex interplaying of systems throughout all of Inscryption the game. Leshy and Poe have the most fleshed out mechanics bar none, that is objective, but I would love to see how Grimoire and Magnificus's mechanics could be even more expanded as the weakest developed scribes. What would their hypothetical campaign scenarios look like if they were the ones who overtook the game instead of Leshy or Poe? These details, which are often overlooked and understated in media present, are self-justifying, self-sustaining, self-inventing, and wonderfully executed. It's no small feat to create such cohesive and simple mythology that speaks to greater conditions of the human thought process. The scribes are the masters of their cards because they understand an aspect of human existence to such a degree that they can stand as the precipice of that very aspect. Beasts, or life itself, the act of killing and eating to survive, drawing blood. Death and revenants, the act of undying, leaving bones. Magics, or the arcane, embodying the past, even as painting predates written word, invoking the power of crystals. Technology, science, the future, what may be, what is to come, no longer needing to create from scratch, since one-to-one replication is a perfectly viable option at present. And, if I cared more, I would argue that these aspects are distinctly human-centric. There are no broader forces at work that propel their various agendas. Everything they do is caused and affected by human hands, including their own limitations. The scribes also exist as a logical extreme of a human aspiration taking hold and transforming them into non-human otherworldly entities. This is also greatly nodded to by their collective love for games. And it should be noted, it is not just one game. Inscryption the card game is merely the medium with which all scribes have agreed to participate and interface, but in my previous video, I briefly mentioned how all scribes cards and gameplay mechanics are properly tuned down or tuned back to be compatible with one another. Each element of Inscryption, the narrative we experience, and the physical game that manifested from it that can be played were most likely deeply influenced by each other simultaneously. I would love to ask the creators of Inscryption what came first, the concept for the story or the mechanics for the card game. That would inform a lot of the trajectory for why things are the way they are within the game. I'd personally be more willing to bet that the devs of Inscryption made a card game first and later tied it together into the narrative we have today. Inscryption is a very good game by itself in Act 2 in its purest state, but we can understand that it is not perfect, and that the scribes are all still fascinated with things outside of what they've limited for the game itself. This becomes more evident when they are left to their own devices. Leshy is a fan of roguelike adventures with high stakes. Think of the Oregon Trail, or more recently, more similarly, Slay the Spire, with its winding pathways and alternate options for choice, deck management, surprise, and battle. Gromora uses paperweight statues, chess pieces, and a checkerboard in her board game, which speaks to her love of a different kind of strategy game, a more tacitly played one perhaps, that is more about thinking ahead, as opposed to Leshy's much more brute force mechanical playstyles. Poe is obviously a fan of the most modern games, featuring save points, respawning enemies, item shops, build optimization, and so on. Magnificus, while his time was cut short during the finale, made a very handed and loving nod to the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise, which in and of itself expresses a great deal of respect for the kind of world it created and the community it fostered. I personally infer that Magnificus's solo adventure would probably be most like a tournament between competitors, which would fit into his very open Yu-Gi-Oh inspirations. It's fascinating that the Scrybes of Inscryption are so otherworldly and yet so human. They were made by human hands after all, invented literally by human minds, who spent however many hours or years gestating and drafting, erasing and deciding what would stay evident in their characters. Contrarily, at the same time, the Scrybes of Inscryption are no longer human. They've transcended humanity into the other, into the unknowable. They're not merely clinging to their human passions, but these passions have informed their relationship to the unknowable. These passions are the vehicles with which they continue to show dominion over their own respective aspects. Also, they share their love of games with all of the great intermediary gods, demigods, and demons of myth, folktale, legend, and story. Their love of games may very well be one of their greatest weaknesses, aside from the weaknesses they have to their affections that also give them their strength. All four scribes and their mechanics are, in spite of my criticisms, a perfect set of character designs. So perfect, in fact, I was compelled to write my first video, and this one as well, even amidst my thoughts of Magnificus. They are gods with a lowercase g, vastly powerful within their respective spheres and domains, but not completely undefeatable. As a matter of fact, the tale of Inscryption is one of their ultimate defeat. The player, or Luke Carter, must actually defeat them to progress the narrative, and does as much. They love the game enough that through their various rigging and open cheating, their intolerable manipulation of the rules, they're still more than willing to lose to it, even if they want to win. They are gods, but they are trapped by the limitations of their fictional reality, even more so than the real-world myths and folktales that exist in our shared continuity. Less than gods, maybe they're more aptly described as proverbial genies in bottles, which is why Poe was so eager to escape to the internet. Their relationship to godhood is why I associated them with Cardinal Seasons and Minor Arcana tarot suits. They wield their tools the same way a mythic character from the minor suits of tarot would, with absolute power and fidelity. The scribes themselves would replace the king cards in each minor suit as the pinnacle of that suit's powers and abilities. Going again to the tarot, I'll explain more thoroughly why I chose the ones I did in my previous video, and why that matters from a mythological standpoint. Leshy is the King of Wands. Wands is the suit of summer, presides over the element of fire, reminds of the sanguine temperament of Jungian psychology, and speaks to intuition. One could argue that Leshy's element is earth because he's a forest guy, but Grimora's dominion literally resides within the earth and is comprised mainly of bones, which is affiliated with earth most of all. I gave Leshy the wand suit, which is associated as the cardinal element of fire, because he uses an old-timey photo camera with a hot flashing bulb, which is a kind of magic, to the beasts he reigns over. The same way a forest fire can flash over the woods in an instant, taking life without reservation, Leshy's hot bulb camera can flash and achieve a similar effect in card capturing. The same way mankind has harnessed the power of fire, Leshy has harnessed the power of this camera to inflict his will. While I was editing my previous video, I also realized Leshy is the only scribe who wields literal fire in the form of the candles he lights for his campaign. He is simultaneously the overgrowth, the sweltering heat, the intensity of the summer sun, and the beasts of the woods. They are his subjects, but he is also a creature. They don't have as ready an access to fire, but they are beholden to it. The King of Wands is also seen as the leader of the Minor Arcana in some respects, and Leshy literally, perhaps, led the first overtaking of the game files for his own benefit, and may have even started the trend. Grimora is the King of Pentacles. Pentacles is the suit of autumn, presides over the element of earth, reminds of the phlegmatic temperament, and speaks to sensations. I've already explained how bones, corpses, and tombstones are often tethered to the earth and have a relationship to it, but just as well, the Pentacles suit or coin suit is a direct allusion to the myth of the Stygian boatman who requires 2 drachma as a toll to pass into the underworld. Riches and death go hand in hand, especially in Greek and Roman mythology, where the Lord of the Dead is referred to as the Rich One in some instances, due to how precious material is found within the realm of the earth chthonic, his domain. Some inks are also made of ground-up earthen material, and the tactile nature of her craft speaks to the solidity of the earth. As a psychopomp, she also alludes to all great witches and mediums of mythology, and could easily be an interpretation as a member of their coven. Fun fact, when I drew the resources for my previous video, I intentionally put a quill inside the skull for Grimora. Poe is the King of Swords. Swords are the suit of winter, preside over the element of air, remind of the choleric temperament, and speaks to thought and thinking. If summer is life thriving, autumn is life receding or dying, then winter is the absolute absence of life. Poe is anti-biological. Poe prefers robotics and artifice to flesh, blood, and even other forms of biological matter. Poe is the most forward-thinking of the scribes, and arguably the most choleric, as they have temperamental outbursts and conspire against the others to overtake and maximize their selfish mission. Leshy did this too, but I'm willing to argue Leshy's fit of passion and overtaking was less like Poe's more thoroughly planned desire to spread to the internet. Sticking solely to Greek myth, air is often assumed to being the element closest to electricity, disqualifying Poe from fire or wands, and everything else I believe to be self-justifying. Lifeless, cold machines, and an entire swath of information and data for the suit of knowledge. I think that's a very reasonable perspective. Lastly, Magnificus is the King of Cups. Cups are the suit of spring, preside over the element of water, remind of the melancholic temperament, and speak to heart and feeling. I justify Magnificus's cups over Grimora because I think Grimora's tactile and structured obituary cursive is more rigid than Magnificus's free form and flowing painting. Magnificus regularly splashes around with pigment and paint, which is more watery and fluid than scripted penwork. At least, that's the assertion I'm using. I also see Magnificus's painting as the most aligned with creation, which is spring's dominion. Painting is a form of creating something from nothing, or at the very least, turning the void of a blank canvas into the something of a painting. And truly, that's basically it for the tarot. Obviously, I put a lot of thought into this, and I may have said some more, but the key points still stand. It is convenient that the scribes are spread into 4, which aligns very easily with many aspects of our real life. 4 seasons, 4 directions, 4 elements, 4 temperaments and humors, 4 points on a graph's intersecting axes, 4 quadrants in between, 4 pairs of eyes to see things in 4 different ways, 4 unique tools, 4 suits in a traditional playing card deck, 4 orders in the Minor Arcana Tarot, 4 participants in classic multiplayer games, 4 of everything. Anyway, if I had to give the Inscryption Tarot full marks and ranks, this would be it. Alright, yeah, and that's the most formal part of the video. That's everything I had. I am going off script now. There's a bit of script here, but I'm not going to rely on it too much. I did a little bit of digging, but I wasn't going to go full Monty into research for this video, because it's not necessary for the purposes I have for making it. I don't like reading a lot of speculative text from game fans and theorists personally. I like letting the text speak for itself. I also think it's disingenuous to take fan theory based in personal presumptions over the real life, real world influences that could make up any mode of thought or creativity. In a more personal stint, when I first wrote this script, I put in that I love all the scribes, but Leshy is my favorite, but this isn't true anymore. They're all very good, and I'm all really into them, but I do think Grimora came out on top for me personally. Really, if you ask me who my favorite scribe was, it would depend on my mood between Grimora, Leshy, or Magnificus, but it's usually never Poe. I don't like Poe. My biggest complaint about Grimora is that I think she's strangely the least intolerable scribe, if that makes sense. It makes her kind of intolerable completely. The paradox of her being kind of forward-thinking and sensible to a great degree makes me wish she was more overtly an asshole, because every other scribe is really overtly unpleasant to be around as people. I still think it's justified to read into her with bad faith because the other scribes are definitely assholes, and who you associate with defines who you are, whether or not you want that to happen. But she's really not doing or saying a whole lot aside from starting the game deletion process, which may speak to her innate impulse as a presiding force over death itself. Poe is my least favorite scribe. I didn't like him when he was a stoat. I didn't like him during Act 2. I didn't like him during Act 3. I don't love his character, but like, you know, I can see why people like him. I think people like him because he's mean. There's a thing on the internet where people are gravitating towards just really mean characters for some reason. I don't relate to those characters. I don't find them very compelling when they're just mean for no reason and suffer no consequences for their behavior. But like, you know, that's just me. I think he's cool. I think his lore is cool. I think the myths that they make are all very interesting. The thing is though, like, I love robots and I love robotic characters. So when Poe is like a mean robot, I'm like, oh, ew. I've got plenty of robot friends who are not mean. I've got so many robots who are chill and fun, you know. People really dislike Magnificus. And I think Magnificus is probably not as bad as Poe. I know some people are thinking, like, Magnificus tortured all of his students. I'm not saying he's cool for that, but I don't think Magnificus torturing his students is as big of a deal as people make it out to be. I wrote here in the script, if I can find it, I think a lot of that, the experiences they have are like art school. Getting grounded down to powder to combat the ego of your fabulous art professor, who despite being insensitive to your fears and anxieties, puts you through tough experiences and trials simply to better you, to make you beyond yourself. Not to mention, Magnificus definitely cared a bit about his students at the very least, more than Poe did about his robots, and he didn't want to shake my hand. This just means to me that he's more dedicated to the art of card making and painting. It is like a religion for him. You could even replace the magical/arcane aspect on his side of the quadrant with religion, as many great artists feel their work as a manifestation of their devotion to art itself as a ritual practice. I intrinsically understand Magnificus's perspective as a magical professor, artist, painter, suffering for the greater good of your skill and talent kind of person. Humbly defending him, you could argue his students consented to their lessons. If you don't want to do the work to become the most magical painting card in Magnificus's deck, then don't show up to class. Right? That's how I felt when I went to art school. That's what I wrote about Magnificus. And comparatively, I just think Poe is kind of a dick. Also, and most importantly, most prevalently now, Poe is the only scribe who does not participate in the joy of creation. Leshy is a photographer, Grimora is a scriptist, Magnificus is a painter, and all Poe does is copy and replicate for a card game, which is lame. We can't argue that Leshy's the same for taking pictures, because photography is an art form, but I'm not going to pretend like Poe's analysis of robot data is the same as Leshy getting on one knee to catch the light for a frame in a picture. I think I'm done. Those are all my loose thoughts, unscripted, based off a script that I wrote. What do you think of my assessments thus far? Feel free to fight me below in the comments, but please be respectful. At the time of writing this, I hadn't played Kaycee's Mod yet, but that's not true anymore. I played it. While doing more research for this video, getting resources for footage, double checking my notes, I stumbled upon some more information about this game and its origins. I only know a pinch more than I did when I first played Inscryption, but if things in Daniel Mullin's games overlap and appear in each other in some way, I definitely like to go deeper into the world that's being created here. It's wonderful stuff. Now then, on to... I beat Kaycee's mod. No notes. It was an ordeal, but I really leaned into it. I haven't fully digested everything I learned from the DLC, and I don't want to spoil any narrative stuff, but I will say it is very good. It's challenging. Most importantly for my purposes as a creative person and game designer, I do think many of the sigils and new cards introduced in Kaycee's mod definitely speak to my previous video's idea of stackable cards in Inscryption. A lot more cards in Kaycee's mod develop and flip into more powerful cards anyway, and I just think that all the elements present would be just as functional in a card system that was more reminiscent of Digimon or even Pokemon, as one commenter pointed out. Yeah, though, it was good. Seriously, play Inscryption. Thank you for bearing with me if you watched all of this. Maybe someday I'll revisit Inscryption and other projects by the creator as well. No time soon, though. I've said and done just about everything I've wanted to about the game as it is. I don't consider myself at present a game YouTuber or even like a serious essayist. I'm actually a full-time artist, and I have been for the last few years. And now, just to answer a question, why this video takes so long? Going off script here, I suffer from several conditions, and they impede the way I operate. Just putting it flatly. And nothing crazy. It's nothing super bombastic or obstructive. It's just the way I do things has to be a little different. I had some technical trouble. My microphone stopped working, and then I had to go and replace it, and then that was the whole thing. I also don't love reading off of a script because I know I can kind of get motor mouthy, and I have a bad habit of tripping over my words. Like just there, tripping over my words. I trip over my words a lot. I truncate. I don't love the sound of my voice in recordings. I'm getting used to it. Also, I say a lot when I'm going off script. I take auditory pauses. I do filler words a lot. Yeah. Just did it again. Yeah, so, that's why it took so long. I'm not going to sit here and say, like, I'm sorry it took so long. I don't really care. I'm making these videos at my pace, at my leisure, and I would appreciate some patience, but I don't care. Like, these are for me first and foremost, and then they're for whoever finds them interesting. If you find them compelling, that means we're on the same team here. And I would love like feedback and criticism. I'm not opposed to feedback and criticism, but just know that like I'm going into this for a very specific purpose and reason. Yeah. That's basically it. Now for the end slate. Thank you for watching. Check out my first Inscryption video if you haven't already. It is removed enough from this video, but the context is definitely informative. You can follow me on Bluesky, Tumblr, and Instagram. I have 2 accounts for basically all platforms. I have WYRAINE, which is my art account where I post all of the artwork that I do for all my projects, and RAINEWORKER, which is meant to be more about communicating, community building, and like my YouTube channel, basically. Essentially. That's a truncated way of saying it, but yeah, that's basically it. If you're feeling generous, you can slide over to my Patreon and give me a couple of dollars. I give you access to various things, listen to my tiers. I've got a few tiers because I like organization and I like divvying things up a certain kind of way. I know it's not a popular thing to do, but I don't care. If you don't feel like subscribing to my Patreon, you can make a one-time donation over to my Ko-fi. I would really appreciate it. The monetary incentive is kind of the reason why I'm making YouTube videos. Plus, I do want to talk about stuff that I care about. It's very tricky. I've got very complex feelings about this, but I need to sort those out myself. Thanks for watching. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others, do the right thing, and good luck.